Hello, everyone. My name is Grant Kramer, and I'm a professor at the University of Nevada, Reno. And today I will be talking to you about what cultivar, what vines to select for Nevada climates. And I'll have to divide this between two places, northern Nevada, which is quite different than the southern Nevada area. But before I do that, I'm sitting in front of a virtual picture that I took just on the edge of Saint-Emilion from the caves or caverns of Chateau Franc, Maine. And when I say caves or caverns, there they are. Um, and you can notice that the big oak tree up here, that's the top of the ground where there's a vineyard growing. And these caverns are cut out of limestone that is beneath all of Saint-Emilion. So there are caverns all going through that. And these big blocks of limestone were cut out to be used to build houses, mostly in Bordeaux. Most of the houses in Bordeaux come from these limestone blocks, but they make now excellent cellars underground to store the wine. So we had a fascinating tour through these caverns, and I highly recommend it if you go there. So with no further ado, let me share my screen with you regarding today's lecture video. So before we get started on the actual vines, just remember that there are over 7,500 different kinds of Vitis vinifera genotypes around the world. When you're considering a selection, that's pretty overwhelming. But the point is that we have just a couple of handfuls of varieties to select from that we use here in the United States, most of which come from the French varietals. And when we talk about Southern Nevada later on, you'll see maybe more of an emphasis should be put on Italian, Spanish, and even Greek varietals. So the first thing to do when you're looking at what variety should you grow is to look at what other people have done and see if those varieties have performed well in your area or not, and choose or start with those selections that people have already chosen. The next thing for consideration when you're picking a variety is also where you get it. And you would like to get that variety from a certified nursery. So you want certified vines from a certified nursery. And what that means is those vines have been inspected and checked over several years to verify that they're virus-free. You do not want to get virus-infected vines, okay? And there, unfortunately, are new viruses that come in, red blotch being one of the more recent ones, where for a while they were selling vines from certified nurseries with red blotch because at that point the disease was not recognized and there were not any tests yet to validate that. So as best as you can, you want to have virus-free material. So these are sort of general principles here in terms of what you want to consider when selecting a variety. And when we're talking about northern Nevada, we're talking about a cooler climate relative to the south. And so we're looking, first of all, for grapes that have good taste. Without good taste, we're not going to get good product. We're looking for moderate vigor in our vines, and we want winter hardiness if we can get it in our vines as well. The more winter hardy, the better. Ideally, we would like vines that had late bud break. The late bud break is going to keep them in dormancy in the spring, dangerous spring conditions where frost might come and damage them. And if they've broken bud, the frost is going to damage or kill that bud, whereas if it's in a dormant state still, it will survive those conditions. Obviously, we would like disease-resistant and virus-free vines. We have problems with drought and salt, so we want vines that have those qualities if they can have them. And we want grapes that ripen early because, again, we can be subject to fall frosts, and we want to get those grapes ripened up and ready before that frost comes. And then marketability is a consideration. Are we choosing a variety that is well recognized and people want to drink? Because many of our wine labels are not blends, but varietal labels, and people buy those wines based upon what variety they want to drink. So here are some of the white varieties and their characteristics that we've grown at our UNR vineyard down Valley Road. And I should say that this is most of what is growing there now. In the past, we had grown Muller Thurgau and Muscat Blanc in the very first years. Unfortunately, those varieties did not do well, did not survive the winters well, and we ended up pulling those vines out and replacing them. So for all of these varieties, we've selected here, every one of them but Viognier has been grown here. To my knowledge, no one has tried Viognier here, but it may have some possibilities because of the characteristics that I'm going to describe here. And then the varieties that I've marked in red are what I consider the best potential varieties for this area. Strictly speaking, based upon our experience at the UNR Vineyard Valley Road field site. There are other parts of the valley that might have other varieties do better because they're on higher elevations or slopes or different amounts of sunlight, etc. So bear in mind, this is what our experience is on the UNR vineyard site. So Gewürztraminer and Riesling are the two, and these are largely chosen because of their cold hardiness. So we're going to look at their vigor, their cold hardiness, their bud break, when they break, and when they ripen, based upon those earlier characteristics that I described to you. And Gewürztraminer has moderate vigor. Riesling has low to moderate vigor. They're both moderately cold hardy, and as I say, these are all moderately cold hardy, but these two have over the years survived better with less injury than any of the other varieties. So even though they're listed in the same category, there are small differences between these varieties. Bud break is later. It's mid bud break time for Gewürztraminer, and it's late bud break time for Riesling. The caveat to that is that this late bud break also runs into a later ripening period. And many times we've struggled to get Riesling fully ripened in the fall before frost has come. The one benefit about Riesling is that there are different styles of wine to make, and you can make sweet wines or dry wines. And if you have a wine that's not fully ripened, then the acids might not be as low as you would like them to be. You can leave a little bit of residual sugar in that wine and balance out that acidity so it's not so tart and maybe more well balanced as a result. Some of the other varieties, Chardonnay has not been outstanding in our area, but and it's susceptible to frost because it's an early bud break variety. But it comes in early. And in some of the outlying vineyards in the area, I know that in particular, one vineyard has produced some really outstanding Chardonnay. So there's definitely potential for Chardonnay here in the area if you have the right site. Pinot Blanc and Pinot Gris are okay. Sauvignon Blanc, I think, has a lot of promise. This is something we planted lately, not too long ago, and although it has high vigor and low cold hardiness, it actually has survived pretty well during recent years. Perhaps that's because of more warmer temperatures that we've been experiencing since 2000. It has a mid to bud break, which is good, and an early ripening phase. And this makes a very nice blend with Semillon. Semillon was not one that we expected because it has low cold hardiness to do well here. But in fact, it's done very well here to our surprise. In some years, it's made some outstanding varietal wines that have just been very aromatic. In other years, it's just been sort of plain. Okay, let's move on to red wines and their characteristics of red grapes. So the best grapes, in my opinion, for the area that I would advise you to plant right now are Merlot and Cabernet Franc. Lemberger does well here, but it's an Austrian variety that's not as well known. It's a little bit different flavor profile, but I have to say a lot of people in the local area have really enjoyed this wine, and I think we've made the best Lemberger in the country. I've tasted Lemberger from New York, from Colorado, from Washington State, and our Lemberger that we make here is pretty good. The challenge with Lemberger is it's a high acidity wine, has a lot of acid in it. It's very hard to get that acid down below 10 grams per liter. I think we've got it down once to 8 grams per liter in all the years that we've grown it. It does have big clusters, high production, lots of juice, big berries, and lots of color. So it's an attractive grape and shouldn't be excluded. But Merlot and Cabernet Franc make a really nice blend. I think Merlot has been our most outstanding variety based upon not only our growing it at UNR, but I've recommended it to a number of people, and people in the area, at least a half dozen, I would say, have been growing Merlot very successfully and producing good quality grapes from it. Now, if I had just my experience of UNR vineyard, I would not recommend Cabernet Sauvignon because of its late ripening stage. But perhaps this is a clonal difference. We used clone 8. And there are other people who planted Cabernet Sauvignon in the area who are successfully growing it and making a very nice wine from it. So more research needs to be done, but this is a late ripening Cabernet for us, mid-October. And by that time, we're really getting subject to frost. Sometimes we get frost as early as September, and other times it's a little later, but usually by October 14th, we're frosted. And Cabernet Sauvignon still isn't fully ripened at that stage. On the other hand, some of the other people in the area where they've grown it have harvested in September some of their Cabernet Sauvignon with very ripe, ideal fruit. So maybe clonal differences, maybe site differences, but there is some potential here. Our Pinot Meunier is normally it's a grape variety that's made to blend with Champagne. It's very similar. It's a single gene mutant. It's very similar to Pinot Noir. It's a single gene mutant difference between Pinot Noir and Pinot Meunier. And some local people have produced some very nice wines off of these grapes. So it has potential here if you like something different. The Pinot Noir, I thought would be too hot here. It's done reasonably well, and in some years made some very nice wines. Again, it's a kind of a finicky grape. I should go back to Cabernet Franc. Cabernet Franc is a bit of a finicky grape too. It makes a very nice blend with Merlot, but it's been sometimes a little quirky in a couple of years where we've had unusual bud break with buds breaking even on the same vine at different times. And I'm not sure what that's about, but something climatically about it. It's only happened a couple of years, but very unusual response. And it makes a good wine here as well. Its cold hardiness is a little different from Merlot in that they have differences in dormancy period as to when they go into dormancy in this fall and when they come out of dormancy. So if I remember correctly, Cabernet Franc goes into dormancy quicker and is more cold hardy if we were to get an extreme cold temperature early on in the fall, which we did one year, where we got down to -6 degrees on December 6th. And all of these varieties were damaged except for the Cab Franc. But it comes out of bud break, out of dormancy quickly, and so it has an early bud break, which makes it more susceptible to frost. On the other hand, with Merlot, we have just the opposite. We have Merlot going into dormancy slowly, so potentially sensitive to the fall, but coming out more late in the spring, protecting it against the frost. Where do we have the most serious concern? In the spring. So the Merlot is a better variety than Cab Franc because it's more susceptible to the spring frost. We rarely have issues with cold in the fall like that, -6 degrees in December 6th. So that's a lesser concern than the spring frost. In spring frost, largely the danger comes from an early spring, false spring that warms up very nicely in February, let's say. Grapes start coming out of dormancy, getting ready to break in early March, and then we get a frost. Okay, Syrah and Tempranillo, varieties I was hopeful about but have not performed well. Particularly, I was excited about Tempranillo because it has a late bud break and early ripening. I thought it would do really well here. Supposedly, it's cold hardy, moderately cold hardy. Neither of these varieties performed well in our vineyard and showed that, I mean, sometimes they would survive a winter, but most of the time they were being damaged and injured and performed poorly in terms of growth. In terms of quality of the grapes, yes, they could produce some nice quality grapes here with the few grapes that we were able to produce. Okay, let's switch gears here and wrap up with Southern Nevada. This will be a little bit shorter because I don't have a lot of experience in Southern Nevada, so I'm just going to outline for you, those of people who are thinking of growing in Southern Nevada, Las Vegas area, what things you should consider in terms of your varieties. First of all, you should not be considering those varieties I just talked about in Northern Nevada. They are adapted to these northern conditions, but will not perform well in the southern area, at least with good quality grapes. And they're likely to ripen in midsummer with very hot temperatures and produce low acid, high sugar with very little flavor in the grapes. So what should you consider? Obviously, you'd like grapes with good taste. You'd like grapes with moderate vigor. You'd like grapes that have heat tolerance since you have high temperatures down there. And therefore, you would also want a grape that had higher acids because that acid is going to drop out more quickly after veraison with those warm temperatures. And so you want to keep your acids up as much as you can in the fruit. Sure, you can add acid back to your wine or your juice after you've harvested it, but ideally you want grapes that are more adapted to the higher temperatures. Again, you want disease resistance, virus-free, drought tolerant, salt tolerant, and then this is an important point. You want as late a ripening of grape as you can find because your temperatures are so warm, you don't want to be harvesting grapes in July and August. You'd like to be in September and ideally into October if you can get that long, that late before they ripen. The reason for that is the temperatures have cooled off a lot more and your night temperatures have dropped quite a bit, which is going to maintain your fruit quality and produce a good grape for making wine. And there, as I mentioned, are 7,500 different varieties out there, so we're not stuck with just these few varietals. And ideally, you want a grape that's marketable, what people know, but in this case, you're going to have more of a challenge because most grapes have been grown in a Bordeaux or Burgundy type climate in northern France, and that's not what kind of climate you have. So you want to think southernly in hotter areas like Italy and in Spain or even Greece. Here's just a chart. I'm not going to spend much time on this, but you can see that these varietals have been placed in a way to fit their temperature profiles for what they do best in. And you've got some white grapes here like Müller-Thurgau, Pinot Gris, Gewürztraminer, Riesling. And then you start moving into warmer whites and then some reds. And up here at the end, you get to some very warmer reds, Carignan, Zinfandel, Nebbiolo, Grenache are all grown in areas that are in warmer climates and are later in their ripening stages. So here are some mid to late ripening cultivars that I did some research on that have been grown in hot climates. And I personally went, after making this list, to visit some areas in Sicily, where Nero d'Avola comes from, in the southern part of Sicily. And I've been to Santorini, where they grow Assyrtiko, and Idani and Icteri. White Wines is a small volcanic island. They've been growing Assyrtiko there for over 2,000 years. These are warm climates. And in fact, this area has a lot of saltiness from the sea air. Maybe these grapes have some salt tolerance to them, yet to be investigated, at least in our area. And I've place these varieties as in reds or whites, and from mid-ripening to late ripening. And I put an asterisk next to the varieties that are very late ripening. So Nero d'Avola is a mid-ripening, but it grows in hot climates. Makes a lovely wine if you haven't tried it. There are Nero d'Avola wines in California that are made that are quite nice. Cinsault, Gaglioppo, these are Italian varieties. Zinfandel, Carignan, the Spanish name is Mazuelo, and it's actually a Spanish grape, as is Mourvedre, which is known as Monastrell in Spain. These originated in Spain and have been grown in southern France and given French names. Aglianico and Ayran, I don't know this one. I haven't tried this one, but these are varieties that are produced in Spain or other hot areas and produce very nice wines. As far as the whites go, maybe Viognier. It does well in our warmer climates here. Fiano is an Italian variety. Catarato Bianco is another variety coming from Sicily. Makes a very nice white wine. Greco is another one, both on the mainland and in Sicily. And then these white varieties from Athiri, Idani, and Acertico. Acertico is the main grape in Santorini, and all of these produce a nice fruity white wine, which quite surprised me, as well as in southern Italy, that they could produce fruity white wines, because we have this concept that white wines don't grow in hot climates, but that's based upon the French varietals, such as Chardonnay. It's not true. In these regions, they have white varieties that do produce fruitful, fruity white wines that are very nice. And Garganega is another one. Oh, by the way, Acertico is in this country. I've checked it at UC Davis, and they do have it at the Foundation, FPS, the Foundation Plant Services, where you can buy this and or talk to nurseries that might be able to get it for you and propagate it. So I think this is a very promising grape variety for you in southern Nevada, as well as some of the reds. Okay, one final consideration for you in the South are you're going to have to take on some different cultivation practices because of your high temperatures. You can't grow them in a vertical shoot positioning system like we do in the north, where the fruit's all exposed. You're going to have heat and sunburn stress on the varieties. You're going to want your trellises, we'll talk more about this later, to hang over the fruit and protect it from the sun. So considerations for you in the South: cultivar selection, as I just talked about; trellis system, which I will talk about in the future, but one thing to think about is head pruning down there. This is what's used in a lot of hot climates, makes them also more drought tolerant. The type of pruning, therefore, is important, and you may want reduced leaf pool. You don't want that fruit maybe as exposed, but you may need some air around it. So if it's protected by upper canopy, below the canopy, you may want to do some leaf pool. The Israelis have done a lot of research with shade cloth using their hot climates, and I know the Chileans are using shade cloth as well. The Israelis are also doing things with different colors of shade cloth to affect the wavelength of light that's hitting the vines and impacting flavor components, for example, in the fruit. So shade cloth can reduce the amount of intense sun that is hitting your vines. Irrigation, you may have to give more water in order to mitigate the high temperature stress that you might be getting, because those stomates are going to close. Those plants are going to not be as cool. The leaves are going to get heated up. This transpiration of water is cooling that leaf. If they're not getting enough water, they might run into heat stress. On the other hand, if it's a heat stress tolerant variety, that may not be as much of an issue. Row orientation should be thought about. Maybe you need to reduce the amount of sunlight that's hitting your vines, particularly in the late afternoon, And so your orientation should be maybe more of an east to west rather than a north to south orientation, or some angle in between that minimizes the amount of sun exposure that you're getting at a particular time of the year. And then another interesting aspect that hasn't been investigated as far as I know here in the United States, but in Spain, they're experimenting with a spray, a sunscreen spray made up of kaolin. Kaolin is a clay, and small particles, they spray it on the leaves, and it reflects the sunlight off the leaf, reducing the heat load and the light load that's on the vines. Now, it's not enough to completely shut down photosynthesis or anything like that. There's still plenty of light getting to the vines. So that's a potential way to improve the character or quality or survival of your vines in a hot climate. And then I don't quite remember why I had this, but mid-row cover crop may be a way of maybe mitigating by transpiration, the cooling of the air, transpiring, cooling the air around the canopy a little bit. But that, of course, requires an adequate water supply. And in our case, most cases, our state is short of water and good quality water. So that is something that may not really be that useful here. These things need to be investigated more, particularly for you in the South. There is a site at the northern part of Las Vegas at the Master Gardener field station area where they're called the Orchard, where we have some vines growing there that we're looking at. But some of these newer varieties have not yet been planted. I hope that there'll be a person after me who will pick up the baton and do some more research down there in the South. So with that, good luck and have a good day.